This is Blackstone Joe, and you're listening to Slick Talk.
If I say I'm an oil man, you will agree.
There's the stink of oil about him.
Hello and welcome into Slick Talk. I am your host, Blackstone Joe, and you are listening to episode 118, Ghosts of Problems Past. So I'm not going to lie to you, the title of this particular episode harkens back to a lesser-known Matthew McConaughey film, Ghosts of Girlfriends Past, which of course is based upon the Charles Dickens story, A Christmas Carol. This has nothing to do with Matthew McConaughey or Charles Dickens, but it has to do with the idea that in the world of used oil analysis, we can see things that have come before, and we can tell you where things are going. So why start things off by hearkening back to a poor Matthew McConaughey film? Well, not only did the title of that film lend some inspiration for the title of this episode, I find an interesting correlation between oil analysis and how we can tell where things are going with Matthew McConaughey's career, which if you can remember, if any of you are cinephiles out there or you paid close attention to certain talented actors that hail from the state of Texas, you know that Matthew McConaughey had something of a trash can of film choices for most of his career, unless you're really into middling chick flicks that take their inspiration from Charles Dickens stories. A lot of them were pretty bad. And I say that as someone who appreciates this dude's vibe for the most part, okay? But after he got through with his rom-coms, he even decided not to take a $20 million payday for another chick flick because he wanted to be taken seriously. And then he moved on to what we now know in pop culture as The McConaissance, which is where he decided to take really good material. He chose True Detective Season 1. He chose movies like The Lincoln Lawyer. He won an Oscar for Dallas Buyers Club. So anyway, in that terrible movie, Ghosts of Girlfriends Past, I'm sorry if there are super fans lurking in the listenership, we were still able to see where things went from there because he started making better choices. Coincidentally, switching gears, a hard pivot here, to the world of used oil analysis. When you send in a sample, we can indeed see where things stand, and if you're like Matthew McConaughey in the early 2000s, things didn't look very good. But the oil will also tell you where things are going. Just like what choices you make in the garage, what choices you make in your career, the maintenance plan, the way you take care of yourself, the way you take care of your engine. These things can manifest themselves in the long term, especially when it comes to how a sample will look in analysis when it's come from an engine that's emerged from a certain situation. Case in point, a 6.7-liter Power Stroke engine under the hood of a Ford F-250. I took a look at this sample and saw, well, things that didn't look great, namely high levels of potassium and sodium. Now, the levels in this particular sample were due in part to an additive known as arch oil. But here's the thing. We have a good idea of what is arch oil and what is coolant, and that is because coolant contamination tends to feature high levels of potassium and sodium. There's a minute amount of sodium present in that particular additive, not a lot. So if we see a sodium level that is out of whack for that particular additive, that's a reliable indicator of coolant. Now, switching gears to the wear metals, we also found that iron was high. This comes from steel parts like cylinder liners, rotating shafts. That's likely related to coolant, although there is also the presence of what might be wear in. This is a fairly low mileage engine after all. However, when you have coolant present, odds are good it's going to cause extra wear, so it's probably a mix of wear in and the engine wearing at an accelerated rate. So ideally, a low mileage engine wouldn't run into a problem like this, but problems can happen, which is why analysis is an integral part of the maintenance plan for any vehicle, whether it's newer or not. So now I'll dive into the comment that I wrote for this particular report, where I focused on the headline, which was the evidence of coolant. My theory behind report writing, one of them anyway, is I want to show my work. Not only do we want to find and identify, what could be a potential problem for you, we want you to understand how we got there. It's not our mission to make oil analysis this inaccessible, mystical thing that you can't understand, but we do. Obviously, we're going to have a better handle because of how much experience we have, but we don't shy away from informing you as to how we arrived at a given conclusion. So the headline was coolant. My next step was identifying how exactly we got there. And then, of course, letting them know next steps. So anytime you identify a coolant leak, you want to inform them of the presence of that coolant, but also let them know to watch for coolant loss, because if you do run out of coolant, you can run into an overheat situation where, of course, things will quickly go south from there. So that, along with a recommendation of checking back after a shorter interval, was the entirety of my comment. We were not looking at other contaminants. Metals other than iron looked okay. So fortunately, I was able to cover my bases there. Even if we find something that is like the key problem, we won't eschew other problems. Anytime you run into a situation where, even though it appears that we focused on one particular area, we won't leave you in the dark when it comes to any other relevant matters for that engine. So you can rest assured that whether it's in the comment itself, a phone call in some cases, if we want to rush the results to you, if you're in like an aircraft situation, we might, make a phone call or email. But all the relevant information was contained in the comment, as you can anticipate in the vast, vast majority of situations. 99.9% of the time, they'll be in the comment as they were in this particular situation. And situations like these, I'll be honest, they're difficult because you don't want to tell someone, that they bought a lemon. You don't want to pass along bad news, but we are inclined to communicate exactly what the data gives us. And in this case, even though it's a younger motor where some of the metal that's being made could certainly be wear in, that's not to say that's going to wear in a healthy fashion, especially with coolant being present. So it's not a situation where I would ever feel comfortable, myself or other analysts, and we wouldn't merely say, what looks like could be coolant, but let's see how the engine settles in. That's not ever what we're going to do. If we see what appears to be a problem that you need to address, we are going to be clear. Even if it's a bummer for us, obviously, to inform you, we know it's a bigger bummer if you're the owner and you're not made aware. So this is not the fun part of the job in the sense that we don't love delivering bad news. But on the flip side, I guess the way to spin zone this is there is satisfaction in alerting people to issues they might not have known about. But in this case, fortunately, the owner was able to pass along some additional information about these results that inspired the title, Ghosts of Problems Past. So in this particular instance, the customer replied by email and let us know that they were aware that there was a coolant leak when they first bought the truck. It was burning coolant, not leaking coolant, but burning enough that even they were able to notice a loss of coolant in the reservoir. Fortunately, in this particular instance, Ford replaced the EGR valve under warranty as they identified that as the source of the coolant leak. So after this particular repair, the owner reported that the truck no longer seems to be using coolant with the new EGR valve. They're going to continue to monitor carefully and send in a sample, and hopefully will identify progress not only in coolant, but in engine wear, because one thing I think people might not be aware of is that engines can improve in how they wear after a problem has been addressed. Something I've talked about in recent episodes, but I think bears repeating, that when you have an instance, whether it be contamination, a low oil level, or any instance where extra wear can be a consequence, it does not mean it will be a new norm. You can wind up with progress, which is what we would fully anticipate. After coolant is no longer part of the picture, the engine should be able to wear better as a result. As I've said before, and I will say again, oil is great for many reasons. One being it can not only tell you what's going on now, but what's going on before, and of course, what's to come. When you send in more than one sample, you aren't just gaining a snapshot of where things stand. Because where things stand might be kind of ugly. You might be in a situation where you have not yet met your reconnaissance, as we talked about earlier in the show. Maybe your engine's career is in a bad spot where you're making a lot of middling romantic comedies. But after making better choices and identifying issues that are present, you can rely on analysis to track, hopefully, where things have turned a corner. And you can understand the progress that's being made. And you can get to your better things, your True Detective Season 1, your Dallas Buyers Club, your Lincoln Lawyer, your Interstellar. I don't know how many Matthew McConaughey projects I'm going to name. I'll probably stop there. But it's a fitting analogy, and I think that what you can do with analysis is not only identify, but monitor, and of course, track the progress. It's important to know where things stand and then find out where things are going. So oil analysis is a tool that you can rely on not merely when you assume there is a problem, but when you want to check for one or see how your engine is recovering from one. Before I let you all go, I wanted to say thank you to Jerry, owner of the Audi Q8. Thank you for your note about Slick Talk on the oil slip. We appreciate you being a listener. And to all of our listeners who have written in, notes on the slips are great. We much appreciate those. Don't hesitate to leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you're using to listen to this show. We appreciate your feedback, and by way of that feedback, more listeners just like yourselves can find the show. So that brings today's show to a close. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Blackstone Joe signing off.
The Slick Talk podcast is powered by Blackstone Laboratories. If you're ready to start your oil analysis journey, visit blackstone-labs.com to order your free test kit.